The courtroom clock struck 9 a.m., and the seats were already packed. At the front table sat Madison Reed, 34 years old, mother of two, and an emergency room nurse, still wearing her faded navy scrubs. Her brown hair was tied back in a tired, loose bun. Her ID badge still clipped to her side, and her sneakers, battered from countless steps across sterile hospital floors, bore silent witness to the 12-hour night shift she had just completed. Running trauma codes, comforting grieving families, holding together strangers' lives with trembling hands. Madison hadn't had time to go home. She hadn't even thought about it. This hearing, this day that could decide the future of her children, wasn't optional. Her ex-husband, newly flush with an aggressive attorney, was challenging her custody, claiming she was emotionally unstable and too unavailable to parent. Madison had come prepared. Documentation, witnesses, truth. What she hadn't prepared for was the look the judge gave her when she entered. Judge Eleanor Whitmore, 62, precise in every stitch of her tailored suit, lifted her eyes from the bench and froze, her gaze hardening on Madison's scrubs. "Ms. Reed," Judge Whitmore said, her voice clipped and cold. "Are you under the impression that this is a hospital?" Madison blinked, startled. "No, Your Honor. I just finished a shift at St. Joseph's. I came straight here." The judge raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "This is a courtroom, not a break room. You are expected to dress appropriately when appearing before this court." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Madison's lawyer, David Lancaster, opened his mouth to intervene, but Judge Whitmore cut him off with a sharp look. "Save it, Mr. Lancaster. Ms. Reed has already made her choices abundantly clear." Madison sat straighter. The gallery, packed with strangers and curious onlookers, watched her, some with pity, some with judgment. But Madison didn't shrink. She looked the judge in the eye, her voice soft but unwavering. "With respect, Your Honor," Madison said, "these scrubs still have blood on them. It's not mine. It's from a 7-year-old boy I helped bring back from cardiac arrest at 4:17 this morning. I didn't have time to change. I just had time to choose save a life or be 5 minutes late to change clothes for you." The courtroom fell into a silence so deep that the buzzing of the fluorescent lights overhead seemed deafening. Judge Whitmore opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. She hadn't expected resistance. Certainly not from a woman in sneakers and a polyester uniform with half-untied laces. Madison sat motionless, her hands raw from hours of gloving and scrubbing, marked faintly by 4-tape residue and trauma board ink. Her heart raced, but her voice remained steady. David Lancaster sat stunned, glancing from Madison to the bench, his planned defenses evaporating like mist in the morning sun. Meanwhile, people in the gallery leaned forward, transfixed. A woman near the back slipped out her phone and quietly began recording. Judge Whitmore exhaled sharply, trying to reclaim authority. "This is not a stage for dramatics, Ms. Reed." Madison tilted her head slightly, not in defiance, but in quiet truth. "No, ma'am. It's a courtroom, and I respect it enough to show up, even if it meant not changing out of the uniform I wore to save a life." The judge slammed her gavel once, sharp and abrupt. "Proceed," she barked. But the damage had already been done. Outside the courtroom, the first clip hit TikTok. The caption read, "Nurse scolded for scrubs in court." Her reply, "Pura dignity." It exploded. By lunchtime, the video had surpassed 500,000 views. By mid-afternoon, it topped 5 million. Madison's words began circulating Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. "Save a life or change for you. I chose the life." Hashtags swarmed the feeds. "Let her wear scrubs, respect the uniform, nurse justice." Local news picked up the story by 3 p.m. By the 6 o'clock broadcasts, national anchors were discussing it live on air. But Madison, sitting inside the courtroom, had no idea. She wasn't tracking likes or shares. She was watching the clock, worrying about picking up her daughter from school still in the same scrubs. The same scrubs now carried more than blood. They carried a story. The next time Madison rose to speak, the silence in the courtroom wasn't out of shock. It was out of reverence. The opposing counsel, Mr. Julian Cross, a private attorney who wore a suit so expensive it likely cost more than Madison's yearly grocery bills, rose smoothly from his seat. His smirk was subtle, practiced, almost lazy. "Ms. Reed," he began, voice oozing entitlement. "Can you confirm that you voluntarily chose to work a night shift before this important hearing regarding your children's custody?" Madison nodded once. "Yes, I did." Knowing full well the importance of today's proceedings? "Yes," she replied firmly. He leaned in, a predator sending blood. "Would it be fair to say that you prioritized your work over your obligations to your children?" The gallery gasped quietly. Madison didn't flinch. She folded her hands neatly on the table, leaned forward, and answered, "No, sir. I prioritized the life of a stranger's child. Because if it were my child coding at 4 a.m., I would want someone to stay. I didn't choose between my job and my children. I chose to be the kind of mother I'd want standing over them in their hour of need." Mr. Cross faltered slightly, but Madison wasn't done. "And for the record," she continued, her voice steady, "every night shift I work pays for their meals, their beds, their school supplies, and their therapy session from the trauma their father left behind." There was a rustle of movement in the gallery. A few sniffles. Someone dabbed at their eyes. Judge Whitmore remained still, her gavel silent in her hand. Mr. Cross cleared his throat. "Clearly, you're emotional." Madison smiled slightly, but there was no warmth in it. "No, sir. I'm not emotional. I am exhausted. There's a difference. One comes from weakness. The other comes from fighting every day to hold a family together when the world tells you you're not enough." The air shifted. Even those who had come in skeptical were no longer neutral. David Lancaster rose. "Your Honor, if I may, before recess, I would like to call our first witness." Judge Whitmore hesitated, then nodded. The courtroom doors opened, and in walked Dr. Monica Bennett, Chief of Emergency Medicine at St. Joseph's Regional. The woman was a commanding presence in her crisp lab coat over tailored slacks. She moved to the stand with the confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime earning her place in the world. Once sworn in, she turned directly to Judge Whitmore. "I'm here to clarify what Madison Reed represents." Dr. Bennett began, her voice calm but cutting. "She's a nurse I call when every second matters. She's the nurse who cradles children while they die because their mothers couldn't get there in time. She is the nurse who skipped 26 consecutive lunches so younger nurses could eat." She paused, locking eyes with the judge. She didn't wear scrubs to insult this court. She wore them because she chose a child's life over convenience, over her own reputation, over everything. The courtroom was frozen. Dr. Bennett pulled a folded note from her pocket. "I'd also like to submit this letter, Your Honor." It was a short note from the parents of the boy Madison had saved hours before. "If Madison Reed had left, our son would not be alive. She is the reason our family is whole. Give her children back. She's earned them 1,000 times over." Judge Whitmore stared at the letter, silent. Madison sat still, tears finally sliding down her cheeks, not from defeat, but from a sheer relief of being seen. When the courtroom recessed for lunch, no one left discussing legal strategies. They talked about her, the woman in scrubs, the mother who showed up real, blood-stained, unpolished, and unforgettable. Outside, a small crowd had gathered. Nurses, firefighters, EMTs. Word had spread. By early evening, every major news network had run segments. NBC titled theirs, "The Scrubs That Shook the System." CNN called it, "Real Strength, Real Scrubs." Back inside, Judge Whitmore sat alone in her chambers, rereading the transcript not as a judge, but as a mother. A woman who had never been forced to choose between duty and dignity. Madison had done both, and the weight of that choice humbled her. When the courtroom resumed after recess, it was standing room only. Dozens of nurses lined the back wall, silent, uniforms fresh and ironed, but their hearts aligned with Madison's wrinkled ones. When Judge Whitmore entered, the room stilled. "This court is back in session," she announced, her voice steady but different. Softer, warmer. Before calling for closing arguments, she paused. Ms. Reed, the judge said, earlier today you said you didn't choose between your work and your children. You chose to be the kind of mother you'd want showing up if your own child needed saving. A long pause. That stayed with me, the judge admitted, her voice cracking. She turned to the court reporter. Strike all prior comments regarding Ms. Reed's attire from the record permanently. Gasps filled the air. This courtroom, the judge continued, has seen polished liars and well-dressed frauds. Today it saw a mother in scrubs, too tired to pretend and too strong to quit. Ms. Reed, you reminded us that dignity is not worn, it is lived. Julian Cross stood and, without pretense, said, Your Honor, I withdraw my final arguments. He turned to Madison, bowed his head slightly, and sat down. Judge Whitmore folded her hands carefully. I have reached a decision, she said. Madison closed her eyes. Full legal and physical custody shall remain with Madison Reed. There were no cheers, only the sound of people finally breathing again. And then, softly, one person began to clap, then another, until the entire courtroom rose to its feet in thunderous, standing ovation, not for a verdict, but for the woman who showed them all what courage looked like. Madison Reed didn't cry. She didn't pose for cameras. She simply gathered her things, walked outside, and hugged her children tightly on the courthouse steps. Is it over, Mama? Her daughter asked. Madison smiled. No, baby. It's just beginning. And across America, people remembered not the courtroom drama, but the woman who wore her scrubs, her fatigue, and her purpose with the greatest dignity of all.